Do you get clutter in your kitchen? It's amazing to me how much clutter that I have accumulated. I've got some here in the sink that have got to be washed, but this is just ridiculous, the amount of clutter that we accumulate in our kitchens. Hello everyone, welcome back to Basics Kitchen, etc. And I say etc. because it's not just all about kitchen cooking and things like that. Today, I look like a mess today, but today I'm cleaning out kitchen cabinets. I am amazed at how quickly the clutter will add up. And so I decided that I was going to attack that project today with a vengeance, because when you've got a lot of clutter, it makes it harder to clean up. It takes a lot longer because you got to, be moving stuff around, and then you get into the cabinets and you find things that have gone bad because it was back in the back and you couldn't see it. And so I'm just reorganizing, putting things like all of my vacuum seal items, all the bags and my vacuum sealers and things like that, putting it all in one little spot so that I know exactly where everything is. Because, you buy something and then later you add to it, and there wasn't room to put the new item where the old pieces were. And so I just decided that today's the day that I'm going to reorganize. The space under the sink where I keep a lot of cleaning things. And I got thinking yesterday, there's stuff under there that I haven't used in forever. And so I'm going to throw it in the garbage. No point in keeping it if I'm not using it. And, I get the mindset sometimes of, well, maybe I'll need that down the road. And as preppers, we have to keep that mindset. But, if you've had something for 5 years and you're not using it, the chances that you are going to use it are slim to nothing. And so I just decided that it's time to declutter. And so I'm doing this project, and then next I think I'm going to tackle the closet. I'm actually working in a closet right now where it's a walk-in closet that I don't use for the typical things. And so I've decided I'm going to turn it into a place to store my buckets of foods and free up some of my pantry shelves for my canned foods. And that way I've got a lot of canned food that's still in in boxes. And that way I can put it all on the shelf and organize that and see exactly what I have. I've always, all my life I've done a lot of canning. But in the last, I don't know, between 5 and 10 years, I have increased the amount of canning that I do. And then, of course, in the last 5 years, I've really ramped it up a whole lot. I've always tried to keep at least a 2-year stockpile of my canned foods. And I do that because when you have a harvest, if you've got a good harvest and you can a 2-year supply, then the next year the harvest on a particular item is not good, then you don't have to worry about running out. You can still carry over until a second year. And so then if you do that 1 year, then you just, rotate. And in that second year, if I have another good, decent harvest, then I put all the older stuff in the front and keep it rotated. And that way I've got a constant rotation of a 2-year stockpile of the vegetables that I can. Of course, other things like your meats and your stews and things like that, I probably don't keep that the same way. I just have a rotating schedule of when I get my beef and my chicken and things like that, and can that all whenever I get it. And so I don't keep a whole lot of stuff like that in the freezer. I do keep a little bit, but most of my meats are in jars. And my son laughs at me, and he just has a fit whenever I can the steaks, but he's not here eating them, so it's my husband and me most of the time that are here eating it, and we love it. So, you have to do what's right for your family. And so getting back to organizing, the more organized your home is, the more that you will be able to find what it is you need. And it's a huge, huge time saver. And so once I get that closet, I'm cleaning it out of everything. It's got stuff that belonged to my grandkids in there, and I found of course, there's a little bit of clothing in there, and some of that belonged to the grandkids too, and games that we're probably never going to play again, and just stuff. And so I was thinking, okay, I'm not ever going to use that stuff again. And it's time to eliminate that from my house and utilize that space for something that'll benefit me. And so, and of course, if something happens that we need to dig into our stockpile of things in the buckets, then it'll benefit my whole family too. Of course, we use out of those buckets all the time anyway, because I use, the grains for making my bread and the things like that. So I'm constantly getting into my buckets anyway. And during canning season, of course, I keep a lot of extra spices dehydrated and in those buckets. And so I can pull out what I need and pour it into a quart jar or whatever, put it on my spice shelf. And so at some point I may take you through the pantry and show you how I've organized, but I've got a long way to go on getting it all the way that I want it right now, because this has evolved with when I was teaching the canning class on Facebook. I was going at it I was canning every week. Every week I was canning something. And so it just snowballed. And I told y'all before, that I just, I was going at it so hard that I just had to fill the shelves however they got filled. And so now I've got a cluttered mess with things scrambled and, green beans in 3 places and tomatoes in 2 or 3 places. And so I have been working on grouping and getting that all done, and then set up, you've seen my working pantry shelf where I pull things from. And I put all of my oldest canned food on that shelf, and that way I know that I'm going to use it first. And then I have an area for all of my meats and stews and my chilies, and anything that's got meat in it or protein goes in that area. I hope y'all had a wonderful Memorial Day and just enjoyed some time with your families. Think about those that have already gone on, and especially those that are in the military. I guess I better get back at it or it's not going to get done. So anyway, until the next time, God bless y'all.